Hello, Erica. Thanks for spending time with us at GTM Expertise. Welcome.
Hi, Ben. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Before we get into it, I wanted to just introduce a little bit about what we'll be talking about today. For those who are watching, this is going to be focused on partnerships and driving those impacts and the value in education. Because of your background, that's what we'll talk about. But I think before we get there, it'd be great to get an intro of where you've come from, what you've been doing, what your career looks like, and a little bit about what you're doing today.
Yeah. Excited to kind of give in and tell you a little bit about my career. I've spent my entire career in sales and partnership, but really the last decade has been at this interesting intersection of higher education, workforce development, and employer talent acquisition. So, really unique space there. But for the past 5 years, I've been really focused on building go to market strategies, especially inside early stage startups. So, going to places that don't have structure or audience or even sometimes product and helping them build that capability and in a way that can really maintain some growth. And so my work has really been focused on taking ambiguity and turning it into something scalable, right?
Mm,
That drive predictable
mm,
growth.
mm,
But in this path, as they say, careers are not linear, right? So my path here was a little unconventional. I started my career in the fashion industry, actually in New York. Hence my poster behind me. And I started off on the wholesale side, so I was selling apparel lines to retail manufacturers or major retailers. And so after several years in the industry, I loved what I was doing, but I was really kind of reading the writing on the wall. The market was that it was going more factory direct. And so I knew I needed to make a pivot. And I just knew I wanted to be at a startup. And that was really where I started my search. It was important for me to have visibility and impact in my next role. And that's when I started in this space that I'm in now at a data science boot camp as their fifth hire. I spent over 6 years at this company building and managing their employer partnerships. I was leading revenue channels and eventually overseeing the entire boot camp after the company was acquired.
mm,
From there, I moved into my first dedicated go to market role. It was another tech boot camp where I was building a new alumni placement revenue stream for them
mm.
and also helped them develop like a SaaS product while I was there that was connected to that strategy. But the division was shut down post acquisition, if you're seeing a pattern here. And that's when I stepped into more fractional go to market consulting and supporting some startups, especially in this new AI space. So,
Mm,
working with a company called Career Span, they are an
mm,
AI career coaching and sourcing tool, helping them with their B2B outreach and messaging and pilot programs. And then most recently, I was at Nexford University at the head of partnerships. I was working directly under their CMO to build and execute a US B2B go to market. So, really looking at tightening the ICP, building outbound engines, defining positioning, and then looking at the data to really evaluate what's working and what's not. I think the core that drives this career, my career, is two things. I love building things, which sounds so broad, but what I mean is processes, programs, new revenue channels, really anything. And I think that that really lends itself to go to market, right? And then because I've been in this unique space, I really care deeply about equitable hiring and economic
mm,
mobility. So
mm.
the ability for folks to be able to have flexibility and mobility in their own career and their own path. So working with products or companies that also share that mission.
Brilliant. Fantastic intro, Erica. I'm really excited to go back to the origins because I think this is really relevant for lots of people because I think what they think they're going to be doing can be quite different from what they actually are doing, and it takes a bit of bumps, or a bit of like directional shifts along the way to figure out what you're actually your purpose or what you really value. Like, take me back to the fashion space and the core sales things. Like, what do you learn? What did you learn from kind of retail sales that you now apply today in your current kind of roles?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Fashion industry is tough, so it was a good place to start off in sales, and, I also had this amazing boss who was my boss for over 7 years, took me to several companies with her, really became a mentor, and, she helped kind of instill some of these core sales strategies that I use even to this day.
Mm,
I think that one of those things is, being flexible and adaptable to the environment, so even though it was
mm,
like a antiquated space, we were always positioned to focus on how can we, you know, help make our client happy, help build
mhm,
sales in that way, so kind of looking at it from a strategic point of view there. Um, she was, like, unapologetically herself, and that made people trust her, and she was, like, this fierce customer advocate, and so that's really what I learned from watching her and her sales techniques and presentations with her own accounts was, that trust means everything, building and nurturing that relationship is how you grow accounts, and then also internally being that customer advocate and letting the customer know that, like, "Hey, I've got your back," and I think that those are tools that you can't really learn by a textbook, right? And they carry on across industries, across, wherever you're at in your career. And I feel really grateful that I got to see her do that and implement that in my own strategies.
those strategies, both of those are two that we're focusing on quite a lot at the moment in terms of just strategies that can be attributed to real humans,
Yeah.
and and today more than ever, I think we do need that kind of human touch, and being flexible and adaptable, like really reading the room to ensure that you can generate value and provide value for the customer. It's pretty hard to do remotely, pretty hard to do with a humanless kind of chain.
Yeah.
And then secondly, like being transparent, authentic, vulnerable, to really drive the message that you're on the customer side. You're really focused on them, and that it's not a kind of um, a one to one relationship. It's really like I'm on your team. I'm really that's
Yeah.
really again really hard to emulate or replicate in this world. So I can see how you might bring those kind of strategies forward into what you do today, because they're just great skills to learn.
Totally. Yeah, I think in this world of AI, there's so much noise around AI taking people's jobs and sales and go to market. And I think the key here is like, yeah, this human element that you can't teach on that level, right? Whether that is, creating trust and being genuine and being a real
Yeah.
human that can talk to these things. I think the biggest tool that I have in my sales kit is empathy, right? And that goes a long way when you're just looking at messaging and connecting and really being able to put on that buyer's hat and think the way that they're thinking and then being able to strategize around that. Um, I haven't found an AI tool that can do that yet.
No, no, and like you're right there. I think, especially in a startup build kind of phase, not a lot of it is around generating revenue from day one. It's around having empathy for the problem you're trying to solve and the people you're trying to solve it with,
Mhm.
and then iterating on that quickly and being very close to the customer to understand what the problems are. And I think again, empathy in that frame of mind is really important. Um, Thinking about how now you've landed it from fashion into sort of generally speaking higher education space. How does that look from a GTM perspective, from what you know from other industries? Like, what's the velocity like? How do you use things like, because I know partnerships is a big kind of part of your play. Like,
Yep.
how do partnerships outperform direct, or like why would you make a decision for that in the education space?
Yeah. I think education is not your traditional B2B motion. Schools, boot camps, boards, they aren't buying a product necessarily. It's really built on trust and alignment and outcomes. Funding is a little bit different in these spaces too, depending on, what kind of partnerships you have. The timeline is extremely longer. It's a bit more of an antiquated system and has a lot more regulation and rules around it. So a lot more stakeholders are involved. And so I think credibility really matters here. And that's
Yep.
why partnerships is really integral in setting up success, because it is a mutual buy-in. And so for me, partnerships has been really important here, but also pilot programs.
Mm,
Anywhere that you can really have kind of proof of ROI on a smaller level that they can take back and then really build a champion from or internalize or really point to larger ROI is
Mm,
super
mm,
helpful in getting through some of this red tape or building this in a larger capacity. Um, but I think partnerships is so important because it's having these 2 organizations that have mutual buy-in and aligns incentives, right?
mm,
This industry, education in general or higher ed, we're all trying to solve a really complex, decades-old problem and challenges. And so it creates kind of this natural collaborative environment where we're all kind of mission aligned, but how can we use our individual expertise with this company? And so that's where I think partnerships really shine here, and it lets you kind of combine expertise, share risk, maybe
mm.
co-design some solutions. Again, talking about that buy-in. And I think from a sales perspective and personally, like it just feels more natural. Like if we are all on the same team here, then it's much better outcomes and we are aligned with the success of it.
And is that because these companies are also, or higher education institutions, are they used to buying through partnerships, or do they have like a trusted partner network, and therefore that's why you would approach them that way, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think traditionally, like, a lot of them are just set up like, "This is the way it's done. This is the way it's always been
Mm,
done. We always partner with this person," or,
right.
we all I think especially in the in technology in this space, it's like, we always just use an Excel sheet, and it's not
Yep.
really efficient, but why put our budget anywhere else, And, I think so it's not only just addressing that problem like, "Hey, an Excel sheet is not really efficient," but also taking it a step further and being like, "If you can get your career service team to buy into this software, you're going to have a greater impact on your students because your career service team is not spending time putting data into an Excel sheet or whatever. So I
Yep.
think it's like
Yep.
making longer, you know, solutions available for these companies as well and organizations that, again, typically I think are just kind of siloed in the way they're thinking and their problem solving. And not because maybe they even don't want to, but just how the system's been set up.
Yeah, and I would imagine, this is me imagining rather than knowing in the education space, but borrowing it from other spaces. And we were at an event last week, which just re highlighted to me this kind of concept, right? As you're selling into these education systems, and companies, they have fragmented departments, like you mentioned, siloed. Budgets have to be allocated very carefully, and really, your biggest competitor potentially, as you're selling in a solution, is like the status quo.
Yeah,
Like, just do nothing and carry on with Excel sheets in you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
not like there's this burning, like I've got to do that, kind of emotional, rarely, or more rare, I suppose. But it's like I'm competing with what's already there, and kind of works, right?
totally. Yeah, I think that that is why it's such a solution oriented approach. And again, kind of taking it a couple steps further of not just like solving this problem, this can solve
Yeah.
multiple problems. So then you can get that buy in and cross functional buy in too. But I also found in this space too that there's just some kind of focus on traditionally looking at it from a lens of just one perspective. And when
Mm,
you look at it from go to market, there are a lot of unique ways that you can approach this from like an ICP, right? There is some funding areas that you can look at to target signals that are like, hey, this person does have funding.
right.
And so I think you can utilize tool sets to really get to those people and the time of making those decisions that can really result in a lot more success too. But in general, in higher ed, there's a lot of noise and it's become this big marketing machine too. Like who has
Yep.
enough dollars in, who's getting their name out there the most, and not really like who has the best program or what is the
Mm.
best fit for individuals. And so I think that that is a lot of a go to market strategy here is just like how to break through that noise and what does that look like and um, how to utilize tools uniquely and differently than what is status quo, to your point.
Yeah, and I think touching on that, that's quite common in a lot of industries these days. Is not necessarily the best solution, is the noisiest solution, but the noisiest solution is the one that's going to be kind of heard, and it's kind of the easier choice, and it's kind of, you know, maybe slightly faster or slightly better in other areas. But in general, as you step back, it might not be the best solution, but if they've got the best marketing dollars and the biggest marketing dollars these days, that
Yep.
can cut through to your point, like it's kind of where it is. Um, Changing tack a little bit, you've come out of a corporate kind of world where, you know, to your right and your left you've got support, you've got structure, you've got tools, you've got kind of the even just the basics of running a business are of course already there, and you can rely on them. What I'm kind of getting at, because a lot of people come out of corporate and go into startups,
Mhm.
maybe they haven't just come straight from a startup, but they've come, you know, 10, 15 years in a corporate role, they want to go into a startup. What do they need to know? Because they're heading into a pretty resource scarce
Yeah.
environment where they don't have a right and a left, like they are the right and the left, like they've got to do all of those bits even just to get their job done. Like, how was that for you going into there, and what did you learn?
Totally, yeah. It's interesting. I always say it's like a sink or swim environment, and, like,
Mm,
I have learned, in the last 10 years that I, like, genuinely thrive in those environments, but I don't think it's for everybody, but I love the idea of figuring it out, making it work, wearing multiple hats, and you're right, that is exactly what you're gonna face in a startup. I think that one of the things I carried over from corporate that has really helped me in a startup world is, um there's a saying in the startup world that, done is best. You don't need to have a perfect product. Being able to test and get data out. And I love that flexibility. But sometimes I think what we trade off is just a polished perception to the customer, right? And so
mm,
there are a lot of times in corporate world that I had chaos behind the scenes, maybe uncertainty behind the scenes, but always kind of presenting this polished
mm,
eh, sales asset or deck or sales presentation to the customer. And I think that that really helps with credibility and trust, right?
mm.
So you can be a startup, you can be, it's kinda like that analogy where it's like a duck, like, you're calm on the water, but your feet are going,
Yeah.
wild under the water, right? So, like, you still wanna present professionally and as polished as you can, and so to me, that's where I'm really prioritizing, like, making a good deck or having a good one-pager to send out or whatever that is, so that we look like we have our stuff together, even though behind the scenes, we are probably still figuring a lot of it out, right?
That's really interesting. I resonate with that a lot. We work with a lot of startups, sub 15 people, and you're right. Like, if you probably presented the entire transparent, excuse me, transparent truth of what's going on behind the scenes, you couldn't go into an enterprise and pitch. Right? There's just no way. But a lot of it is about, you're right, like maintaining the same level of professionalism as the alternative solution, which might be some great big behemoth of a platform that's been on the books for 20 years, right? If you're going to compete for that business, you can't kind of expose yourself as sort of a scrappy, kind of pretty disorganized place, because ultimately you still have to go through the same procurement hoops,
Yep.
minimally, of like data security and anti this, anti that, all the kind of legislation wherever you're doing business. And I think that's really key. That
Yeah.
resonates a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think on the flip side though, like the positive to a startup or really where you can shine against those big organizations that have been around is the flexibility, right? And this
Mm,
ability to like going into it knowing that this is going to change is key. And so, you can set up and test a campaign in a short amount of time and you just know that you're again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm gonna get it out there so I can read the data, and I know I'm gonna have to be agile on this, and I can just follow what's working and what's not, and I think that that's where, uh, speed is so important in startups, where they can really beat out those larger organizations that, come from a background of it has to be polished and perfectly planned, and this is what we've decided on, and those things change. The market's changing daily. We need to be in a place that's adaptable and able to just
yes.
really go with where we're seeing impact.
Yeah, we had an interviewee on recently, Matt Lerner, who talks about these growth kind of strategies, and that you're likely to do potentially 1,000 experiments, but like two or three of them will be the ones that make the difference, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
And the faster you can get through those, and the faster you can iterate on those, the faster you're going to learn which ones are going to be the lever. And that's, to your point, that's okay if you if you sort of adopt a corporate
Mhm.
maybe strategy of like, there's this sort of waterfall kind of approach of achieving the end goal, and you're planning for this big launch or this big kind of hit. While you're doing that, the market's shifting every day,
Yeah.
especially today. And I think so you need to get that pulse on the market. You need to get to understand those signals as quickly as possible, make those experiments. So yeah, that resonates as well. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in data and analyzing it and looking at it and essentially following it, right? And so, I always say like bad data is still good data, right? Like
Yeah.
it might not have the open rate or the conversion rate that we're looking for in a campaign, but at least we know then that that is not something we should continue on. That also is it's really helpful data.
That's a
And
signal. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Everything's a signal. Yeah, as far as we're concerned. How do you get in to a startup and build the GTM pieces of the puzzle, the scaffolding required when there's nothing? And how do you get buy-in from the people who are employing you that they kind of need something? And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those things that I kind of took for granted and just like the way my brain works, and that I can really see something from far away, but also kind of break down the granular steps needed. And perhaps that is coming from just like a sales background. So in these
Mm,
go to market roles at a startup and they're just like, go, the first thing I'm looking at is like, what is the value prop here? What do I want to test as a value prop? And then really going from value prop to ICP and then really figuring out messaging channels and signals that we can use to make sure that we're getting to them at the right place and the right time. Um, and then I'm a big fan of just going. Again, we need that data. So like it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's test a couple of hypotheses and get some, campaigns out there so we can see what's working, what's resonating, and what's not. And then we can like adapt and go from there. Um, so I think value prop is for me always where it starts because then that helps me understand where to go from there. I think as
mhm.
far as buy-in, that is still something I work on internally where it's like I think I can do all these things by myself. I certainly try to, but I'm always at a place where I would love more marketing help or support. But because
Yeah.
I'm doing a go-to-market effort, you know, I I probably get what I get, and I make it work. But I think that there are times where I'm like, this is a key KPI for us, and this is what I need to
Mhm,
achieve it. Or here's
mhm,
some additional data I have, but to really, expand on this, I need like this. We really need to dedicate some resources to this core asset that I think would be
mhm.
helpful in conversions or really translating this message or however, I think it would best fit the campaign. But I think it's constantly kind of reprioritizing what can I handle on myself and where do I need to tap out for some external resources? Because I do think that that kind of polished aspect that I personally am not like the best at
Mm.
is important too, right? So I don't ever want to like trade that off for being stubborn and saying like I've got everything when I can have a marketing team give me like a really pretty visual that makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense in startups. You've got limited resources. In a corporate, it's often like there's quite a lot of resources. Somewhere it's about fighting for your kind of area and building your kind of structure, and that's not the case in a startup. You've got very limited resources, and frankly, if you're going to ask for any, you better come with like a really long justification. Oh, by the way, do it really quick, because if you don't do it, then that money's going to be spent tomorrow
Yeah.
somewhere else, right? Because we're like, you talk about speed a lot, which I really like. um, Changing a little bit, you talk about what I get from you a lot is like resilience, because in your career path, you've taken some external factor hits where you're not really in control of them, right? But like some external factor, like a company gets acquired or whatever it might be. Um, can you share a bit more about how you approach those kind of moments? I know a lot of people will be kind of like nodding at home, going, "Yeah, I've seen a few of those in my life." Like, how do you approach those personally, and how do you address those?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like, I love go to market for products and for companies, but when you're looking at your own career, there's like a go-to-market element there, right? And like looking about how we're gonna
Right.
position yourself. What does that mean for your career long term? How do you want to structure this? And recently I've been looking at my own path in that light, and it's been super helpful. And
Mm.
I feel like it was this moment where it was like, yeah, I'm doing this for other companies. Why can't I do this for myself?
Mhm. Yep.
Um, but in those moments of acquisition or, times where I'm like, "Oh gosh, what next?" That is where I'm like, again, I think it's taken me a while to realize it, but I'm putting on that go-to-market hat and being like, "Where's the market?" Like,
Mm.
where do I feel like there's longevity here to use my skills, and what am I really passionate about, or what do I wanna stick with, or what do I wanna change up, right? And having those conversations internally. And nobody likes when that happens, but I do think it's like a natural reflection. I mean, I think there are many times in my career where I probably would have just stayed stagnant if I wasn't forced to
Right.
pivot and reevaluate, right? And so, um, I think having these go-to-market skill sets are some of the best skill sets to have when you are career searching or even just thinking about your own career strategy and what you wanna do with that. And so, looking at it from that perspective is super helpful in my own context.
I can see that. Yeah. I mean, I think um the concept that you can't really control what you can't control, right, is important to recognize. And like a go to market pivot or whatever it is inside a startup, it's the same if you're in your career. And sometimes these external factors are kind of useful to reboot your vision. And then you pivot and you go to the next piece, but maybe you make an advance at the same time, right? And I would always advise that to folks as well, is going back to our original start where you started out in fashion, probably didn't think you were going to start out in fashion, but you started out in fashion, didn't think you'd be ending up in higher education. But these are the paths that you can take as a career and as a startup kind of contributor. And I think having
Totally.
that kind of resilience and kind of like, I'll take everything as a nudge towards something else is really valuable. So I love that.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, and I think it's, like, kinda going back to, like, where the data is too. Like, I think
Mm,
now, like, my career with AI coming up, like, what does that look like, right, long term, And so protecting myself as far as, like, the skills that I'm gonna focus on, and also, where do I wanna be at in a company that,
yep.
um helps implement AI, not fight against AI, but also not, again, this theory of it taking my job, right? And
Mm.
so, finding that middle section with companies and in my own career and how I can help be that middleman, right? And kind of toe the line on that subject area.
I love that, Erica. And I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. Thank you very much for spending your time with the GTM expertise. Super interesting to hear your background and where you spent time in the higher education sector. We wish you well for the future and hope to see you again. Thanks for your
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers, Erica. Bye.
Thanks, Ben.